Who's here online?
Mary and Colleen.
Oh, okay. Hi, guys.
I don't know if I can talk back, but I have the
Okay. I'm handing out a copy of the checklist that I used to Heidi. Sorry you guys aren't here, so I can't hear you, so you can't ask me any questions, I guess.
I think they can type it in.
Let's see. Yep, I don't know. Hello.
Hi, Steve Hurley.
Hi, Steve. I'm Dawson.
Hello. Where did
Let me just check. Excuse me. Just real quick here. Over there.
I'll scoot my stuff over. Whew.
Well, it's probably better if they're muted.
Yeah, so they can just type into the chat box.
Okay.
And it'll alert
So Jessica says if you guys have any questions, you can type into the chat box on your screen. So.
Okay.
Jessica said she sent out a copy of all the disclosure forms that I scanned to her. You got it? Okay, great. Did you get a copy too, Steve?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. That makes it easier. I'm hoping you guys have those at home too. We've got a couple people dialing in online. Oh, let me give you one of these two, Steve. This is the checklist that I use. It's a little outdated because it doesn't have all the newest forms on there, like the RRRR, but it's good enough for now. So what I usually do is I just divide up the checklist and divide up this class into two kind of columns because when you have the buyer and when you have the seller, or sometimes you have both, you want to focus on different things. If you just have the buyer, then you're going to be receiving disclosures from the listing office, the listing agent, and their seller. And there aren't really buyer disclosures per se, but we do have a collection of buyer documents that we like to make sure all the buyers have. We want to make sure that they've got their opportunity to do their inspections and that they're fully aware of their responsibilities and their rights, so that if they have any questions or if they want to find out more information about the property, they can do that. So I guess we'll just start with the agency disclosure. If you've got a buyer or if you've got sellers, you're going to have a disclosure or an agency disclosure with them saying that you represent them. So that's what the agency disclosure is. That's the first thing in the stack. Right behind that is the PRBS, the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. The reason these are at the top is because if you're going to write a contract for your buyers, the very first thing that's on the contract is they've already received these two forms. Before they've even filled out the contract or even made an offer, the very first thing on the front page of the contract is they've already signed their agency form with you and the PRBS form. So I just want to make sure you get this done and out of the way right away.
So the first two, that's the first two?
Yep, those are the first two forms in the stack.
And it's for the buyer or the seller?
You'll have an agency with the seller if you're representing the seller. There's actually three different agency forms, one between the listing agent and the seller, one between the selling agent and the buyer, and a third one between the selling agent and the seller. Usually what happens is if you have a buyer, the seller can countersign your agency with the buyers down at the bottom. Where it says that's seller A and seller B down at the bottom of that form. Mm-hmm. If you're just representing the sellers, then you'll have a listing agreement with them, and you'll have an agency with them that's separate that the buyers don't have to sign.
Okay.
So, but in this case, we are representing a buyer, which is typical for new agents usually, and start with buyers first. You'll have the agents, the listing or the sellers will countersign your agency with the buyers.
Okay.
Was I going to go someplace with that? No, okay.
So there's three different
Yes.
ones.
It is a little confusing.
It is, yeah, very.
Yeah. If you're taking a listing, you want the agency that's between the listing firm and the seller. On the other agency, they call it the buyer's agent is called the selling firm. You can see that at the top of this form. It says selling firm to buyer, so that makes it a little bit confusing. The selling agent is the buyer's agent.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, so that's kind of confusing. And most of the time, you only see the selling firm to the buyer and the listing firm to the seller. You won't see the third one, which is the selling firm to the seller, because the seller can countersign your form. You don't have a separate form for that. So it's just avoiding some extra paperwork there. And the PRBS, again, because other agents in your brokerage could be representing other buyers and sellers who are competing on the particular listing or whatever, that's why we have to have that, just to cover our butts, basically. Just continuing like on the left side of the checklist with purchase documents, obviously you're going to have your purchase agreement, your agency with your client, and then the next thing on that, at the top of that form, on the buyer side anyways, the buyer's inspection advisory. Again, this form prints automatically whenever you print out a contract to write an offer. So it's automatically there. You don't have to check it specially. It comes with it automatically. And the agency disclosure form and the PRBS also should come with it automatically anyway. Zip forms kind of makes that easier for us now by making sure those documents are automatically included. So the buyer's inspection advisory is just letting the buyer know that they can have inspections done on them, whatever they want, whatever they're willing to pay for. You know, the most common ones are obviously a home inspection and a pest inspection, because those are the big ones. But you know, in case of your property, it could be a septic might be needed, or a well inspection. Those are pretty common. Pool, sometimes people want to have a separate pool inspection that's not covered by a home inspection usually. So there's those kinds of things. But the buyer's inspection advisory just lets them know that they can get all kinds of inspections, and it's their responsibility to do that too. You're not necessarily the source of all information, and that's kind of what that helps you to emphasize with your clients. And then right after that, because the FHA loan and our VA loans are so common, the Zip Forms has also made that form automatic. If you check the FHA or VA financing on the contract on your offer, this form will automatically become part of the contract too. And that just basically, you know, I'm not really familiar with this form itself, but I think it basically lets the, has the seller and the buyer agreeing that because the buyer is getting a government-funded loan and there are certain things they can't pay for, especially the VA loans. And that just kind of makes it all clear up front as far as financing is concerned. If there's a pest inspection involved on an FHA or VA home, I know VA loans require Section 1 clearance before they can close. FHA, I'm not sure about Section 1 clearance, but if you have a pest inspection in the contract, they're going to want to see the lender's going to want to see that report, and they might require that you do some repairs. So just be aware of that. Closely related to the FVAC, and I don't have a copy of it in here, there's also an FVA form that's used for when you're requesting repairs on an FHA loan. As I said, some things the lender is going to require, some things depending on the loan type. So just make sure that you're aware of that when you're doing an FHA or VA loan. Talk to the person who's doing your lending and make sure they understand that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of talking to the crowd because I'm pretending that the people who are on the phone are actually here in the room. If you guys have any questions at all, please interrupt me because I don't want to be lecturing you all for an hour. Then the next form that I have is the buyer's affidavit. It's just a simple form stating that the total sales price of the house doesn't exceed $300,000. If it does, then you don't need this form. If it's the other part of this form is stating that the buyer is going to live in the house. If that's not the case, if they're buying it as an investment or something, then you don't need this form. Really, that form is for possible tax consequences. You want to make people aware that their property taxes might change depending on whether they're an owner-occupant or not, and also the price of the property does have some effect on that too. And that's the kind of thing that they'll probably go over them. Escrow will go over with the buyer usually because it's going to show up on their HUD-1 statement, property taxes and that kind of thing. Property taxes and issues related to that are also brought up in the NHD report, the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report, which is required on every transaction. Even vacant land, you still need to have an NHD report. So that's always required. Sometimes sellers are exempt from providing an NHD in the case of like a trust sale or something like that, or an REO sale. They might be exempt from the actual report itself, but the information in the report, no one's exempt from providing that. There's information about natural hazards, about environmental hazards. It doesn't matter if you're exempt from providing the NHD report itself. The seller still needs to provide that information. So 99 times out of 100, a seller is going to provide an NHD usually. The seller will pay for that. Sometimes the buyer has to pay for it, but in our office we require the NHD report on every transaction, even vacant land, because it's just part of our effort to cover our butts. So the next form is the buyer's inspection waiver. You only use this, well, a lot of times people ask for it even if it's not really, it doesn't really apply. If your buyer's going to get a home inspection and a pest inspection, this is the form that they use to say they're not going to get those. If they are getting them, then you really don't need this. But there is a space down here at the bottom. You can check off the reports that they did get. If they got a wood pest and they got a general home inspection, you can write those in right down at the bottom, and they can sign saying that they received those reports. But if they're not going to get them, then they're waiving them, and that's where they initial in spots 1 and 2. You can also use this form if you want to waive the home warranty. You can just write in home warranty in Part 3. I have a form that I use for the home warranty waiver, which is right behind that one, also included in your package. But you don't have to use that waiver. You can just have to use the BIW. Also, in the contract, there's a spot where you can check the buyer's waiving their purchase of a home warranty. It's actually on page 2 or 3, right below where all the cost allocations are. Buyer can request the seller to pay for a home warranty, or they can just waive the right to get one right there on the contract. But you can use the BIW form for that too. So if they're going to get a home inspection and a pest inspection, or just one of each, or one or the other, if they're not going to get one, then they initial that spot that says, I'm not going to get one. If they are getting one, then don't initial it, because they're getting one, so they wouldn't waive it.
So this doesn't need to be included if they get it? No.
If they're getting both, I would still include this form and then just fill in. Down at the bottom, like I said, there's a spot where you can check they got a home inspection and they got a pest, and they were done by these people on this date. Another form that you can use is further down in your package called the receipt for reports. That's a nice catch-all form that you can use for everything. You can put your prelim on there, your NHD receipt, any inspections that they got, any previous reports that the seller provided. Sometimes the seller has already done a pest, and they'll have a copy of it, and the buyers are just accepting that one rather than doing their own.
What's that form called?
RFR, the receipt for reports.
Receipt for reports.
Yeah.
Do we have a copy of that here?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's called RR, not,
Oh, yeah.
no, it's RFR, sorry. It's RFR, receipt for reports. I think I put one in here, back at the back.
Oh, yeah, here it is. Receipt
Yeah.
for reports. RFR?
Yeah, that's a good catch-all because you can put all your stuff on there, and your buyers don't have to sign, 5 different pieces of paper. They can just sign that one receipt for everything. So that kind of makes things a little bit easier too. Especially if the seller already has reports that they're providing to you from a previous transaction sometimes, like somebody filled out a contract, they already had a pest and home inspection done, and they have copies of those reports that they're giving to your buyers.
Yeah.
You can just take those and they can not get their own. They can just accept the ones that were already provided. So behind the buyer's inspection waiver is the buyer's inspection elections. Again, that's just a form that kind of lists all the inspections that they can get pretty much, and more, because they can add stuff too. It's right there. Yeah, there you go. So usually people just check the first 2, wood pest and home inspection. They don't check anything else. We ask that you have that in your file so that we know the buyers had the opportunity to get things, and if they don't want to get them, then they can say that they don't want them. But we want to make sure that they've been given the opportunity. Because we don't want buyers to come back after the fact and say, oh, you never told me I could do this or do that, and now this thing is broken. Like, well, here's the form where we told you you can get all this stuff, and it's up to you to investigate that.
I heard that buyers are the ones who sue, generally. Not sellers. Not sellers.
Yeah, buyers usually have buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
So exactly. They encounter problems after close of escrow that they didn't anticipate or weren't aware of to begin with. That's the thing that disclosures are really all about. You're educating your clients, mostly buyers, obviously, because they're the ones who are making the purchase and putting, a lot of faith in you. But also sellers too. You want to protect your sellers because they have to disclose any material facts, and that's what the seller disclosures are for, to help them do that in the best way to protect themselves so they don't get sued later. I see somebody had a question. Let me see if I can see it. Hang on a second. When do you use the buyer's affidavit form? In all cases? Hey, Mary, the buyer's affidavit is used if the purchase price is under $300,000, which in our area that's pretty common. Maybe not in Grass Valley so much. Or if the buyers are not going to live in the house, then they wouldn't have to fill out the buyer's affidavit. If they're just buying it as an investment, they're not going to live there, then they don't have to, their tax situation is going to be different, so they don't have to sign the buyer's affidavit.
And what does the buyer's affidavit state? That you're going to live in the house?
There's a couple of things. The first is that, number one, I am the transferee or buyer of the property known as the street. The sales price is less than $300,000. And number three, I am acquiring the real property for use as a residence.
Yeah. Why does it matter if it's under $300K? What's so
It's something to do with, well, there's also the seller's FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment in Real Estate property tax thing. It has to do with taxes, basically. If you live there, your tax situation is different than if you rent it out, because it's an income property, and so that situation is different.
Yeah.
And there's different tax consequences. I don't really know about that kind of stuff.
300K, I'm just wondering what's so special.
I don't know.
about
Yeah,
that.
that's where the tax kicks in or something. I don't really know,
Could be,
honestly.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's the magic number.
Okay.
So did I explain that for you, Mary? If you have any other questions, you can email me as well too. So then the next form is the 4-year protection get a home inspection. This again is just to kind of emphasize that we really recommend that buyers investigate the property to their satisfaction. And so this is just another opportunity for them to say they don't want to get a home inspection, or they do. So that's the one after the BID. After that, there you go. So this is called the HID, and we'd like them to check that too as well. And then after that, I have the notice of supplemental property tax. This is again kind of related to the buyer's affidavit and the seller's FIRPTA. Usually when a house is sold, you get another assessment from the county usually. So your taxes could go up or down depending on that assessment. So this is just a notice to the buyer. And some of this stuff is redundant because it's going to show up in other forms too. It's in the NHD report, it's in the SBSA, it's actually in the contract too, I think. It mentions possible tax situations or possible tax consequences to buyers.
Oh.
And then there's the receiver for reports after that. That's not required in your transaction, but if you use one, you want to make sure that's filled out correctly. And like I said, this is kind of a catch-all for everything. So the buyer's going to get a preliminary title report, a natural hazard disclosure, any inspections that they get, or any reports that they get from the seller from a previous transaction. You can just put them all on here and have your buyers sign that they received them, and then you're good. You're covered. A lot of offices will ask you to have your buyers sign the front page of every report that they get, like the prelim and the NHD, because we require the NHD receipt too. But you can also use this receipt for reports to kind of cover all those things at once if you want to. And then below that one is the contingency removal. The buyer has 7 or 8 or so contingencies that are outlined in the contract. They're getting their loan, getting the appraisal, their investigations of the property, and after 17 days, and their investigation period is over, they usually have to submit a removal of at least those contingencies to the other side. 21 days now for loans, but I think appraisal is still 17. Appraisal and buyer's investigations is still 17 days. So after the 17 days, the other side is going to ask you for a copy of this usually if they're on the ball.
So this is after the 17th.
Exactly. After 17 days or after 21 days for the loan, your buyers are usually going to have to remove all their contingencies, and then their deposit would be at risk if they decided to cancel after those 17 days. And so that's really important for your buyers to understand that they could lose their deposit if they don't get their inspections done in time. And this is also kind of puts a little bit of pressure on the listing side too, because the sellers have technically 7 days to get all their disclosures and reports to you for your buyers. And if they don't do that, then that extends your contingency period for your buyers, because they have to be able to review all those reports. If they don't get them on time, then it extends the buyer's contingency period. So be sure to, if you're the listing agent, you want to make sure your sellers fill out all their disclosures as soon as possible after getting your listing. That way you're just prepared and you've got it ready to go. Technically, you're supposed to be able to provide the TDS and SPQ to potential buyers before they even write a contract. Mm-hmm. So the earlier you get those done in the listing period, the better. So, and we'll go over those later, because that's the seller side. And then the last thing in the buyer side, oh, actually there's the ABID, but the verification of property condition, that's like the last thing you do with your buyers. Right before you close, usually once everything's gone smoothly, you've got all your loan, and they've gone to title and escrow, and they've already signed and everything. The day, usually a day or two before you are going to close and record, you want to go look at the property one more time with your buyers, make sure everything's as it is, as it was when you first saw it. And people do have stories of, oh, it burned down the very day we were going to go, or flooded, exactly.
Yeah.
That is actually happens a lot in the wintertime around here. Pipes freeze and then and break. So you do your final verification of property right before closing just to make sure everything's okay. Any repairs that you requested, or you want to make sure that they're done, that kind of thing. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, good. So then right below that is the ABID. The ABID is the agent's visual inspection disclosure, and it's actually part of the contract. So this is required on every deal. For vacant land, it sort of can go either way, and because sometimes there's nothing to see, so what's there to put in ABID? The ABID is really designed for single-family residences and for property that you're looking at, because it's all divided up into different rooms and stuff like that. But on vacant land, if there's services on the property like water or electricity or a pump or anything like that, we did have a vacant land purchase that had some issues with it because it turned out there was some waste storage on the property somewhere. It's like 5 acres of property. Who's going to do a visual inspection of that? But the sellers acted like they didn't know it was there, and no one had ever seen it before. So the ABID is not required for vacant land transactions, but it's a good idea if you're doing one, especially if it's a walkable property, that you look around to make sure that there's nothing that someone's going to object to, or some material issue that might affect the value of the property. But the ABID is really just your visual inspection of a property. You're not there to diagnose problems. If there's stain in the ceiling, it's just a stain. It's not a water stain. It's just a stain. Because you don't know what caused it, and you don't know, and that's not your job to diagnose problems. You're just there observing. You don't even have to open closet doors on an agent's visual inspection. You're just looking at the property and describing what you see. Both agents need to complete one, and the buyers and sellers both need to sign it, and both agents need to sign on page 3. So when you do the AVID, when it's your AVID, you actually have to sign it twice, because you did it up at the top part and on page 3, and then you're representing whichever client you're representing down below. So make sure when you do your own AVID, you sign it twice. A lot of people miss that one. But yeah, both agents will do an ABID, and yeah, if you don't get one, it doesn't count. I have right below that, because we're starting to get back into, now we're going to start getting into like the seller's side of the disclosures. Right below that is the seller's advisory, and that automatically comes out whenever you print out a listing agreement. The seller's advisory comes with it automatically. So let's start on the right-hand side of the checklist with listing documents and seller disclosures. And you might as well just think of that as one thing, because when you take a listing, you want to bring all your disclosures with you as well. You might as well.
The TDS and SPQ?
Especially the TDS and the SPQ are the most important ones. Yeah, those are the ones where the seller is disclosing material facts that they know about the property. So the transfer disclosure statement and the seller's property questionnaire, it's 7 pages total between the two of them. The TDS is 3 pages. The SPQ is 4. There's a lot of detailed information about the property. They have to check every box that applies as far as the features that are at the property. Since we're on that subject, let's skip ahead a little bit and we'll go right to the TDS and the SPQ. I got them right next to each other, right before the SBSA. So the first page of the TDS, that's like what's at the property. A range, an oven, a microwave, is there a pool, a gazebo, gas supply. That's like detailed information about the property. So you make sure that they fill that out completely. And then the other pages are get a little more general, but page 3 is the one that's important to look at, because the sellers need to sign it in 2 places, up at the top and at the bottom. And you also have to sign it as the listing agent. And you want to make sure you check the box in part 3 where it says agent's inspection disclosure. you want to click the first box, see attached AVID. If you did an AVID, and it's included with the TDS, so you're going to make sure that that box is checked. The SPQ, you don't have to sign the SPQ, that's just for the buyers and sellers. That's 4 pages, it's a little more detailed about the property. You want them to make sure they answer every question, yes or no. If they say yes to anything on the SPQ or the TDS, they really should explain it. On page, let's see, page 2 of the SPQ, under F, it's animals, pets, animals, and pests. If they check yes for pets on the property, then they should say, what kind of pets did you have? Dogs, cats, indoor, outdoor.
Can they explain it where?
If they check yes, yeah, right down the explanation area, they can just write in anything. And and for the TDS and the SPQ, you're certainly welcome to attach additional sheets. If the sellers had some repairs done or some foundation work done or something really complicated that they want to explain, you can add extra sheets. That's totally fine. I just had one where the sellers had a lot of fruit trees on the property and stuff, and they actually included a list, a very detailed list of every single kind of tree that they had on the property, which I'm sure the buyers really appreciated. You don't have to get that detail necessarily, but some sellers want to do that, and that's fine. It's a good idea to start with the TDS and the SPQ with your sellers, because those are the most detailed ones, and they have the most information about the property itself. And that kind of gets your sellers thinking about, you know, what improvements they may have done, what painting they may have done, what problems they may have had in the past that they had to fix.
Memory jog.
Exactly, it's a very good memory jog.
And these are the ones you said they should get going before even
Yeah.
agreement?
When you do your listing agreement, it's a good idea, I think, to bring, I'll talk about all the important ones, but the TDS and the SPQ, you might as well bring those with you and give them to your sellers and say, this is your homework, basically.
Try to get it done.
Yeah, because think about it, you want to make, well, exactly, before you even get an offer. Because if you get an offer and they accept it, you have 7 days to get all this stuff done.
Oh.
If you've already done it, then you can hand all your disclosures over to the buyers on day 1 and say, get started. In 17 days, I'm going to ask you for your CR, your contingency removal. So here we go.
Perfect.
But the TDS and the SPQ are the most important ones because they have the most detail. In an REO situation where the listing or the seller is a bank, or in a trust situation where the seller never lived in the property, they acquired the property either through death in the family or inheriting it or something like that, and they never lived there and never owned it, then they're not going to provide you with a TDS. So in those situations, what I usually do as a TC is I provide blank copies of those forms to the buyers, just so they know these are the kinds of questions that the sellers are not answering for you. And you should probably, you know, investigate these issues as much as you can to your own satisfaction. So that's just a conversation you want to have with buyers in a situation like that, where it's a bank-owned property or a trust or something like that, because the questions that are on here aren't being answered, and it's important information. So it's a good idea to provide those forms, even if the seller's not going to fill them out. At least your buyers are aware of what they aren't being told, that kind of stuff. Okay, so those are the 2 big ones. When you go on your listing agreement, your listing appointment, you're obviously going to be in your agency with the seller and your listing agreement, because that's how you get the listing. You're also going to have your seller's advisory, because that comes automatically with the listing agreement. And that's pretty much it as far as listing documents. Everything else is just seller disclosures that they'll be filling out. So let's start at the top of that with the seller's FIRPTA. We kind of mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about the buyer's affidavit. The seller's FIRPTA is kind of confusing and can be problematic because one of the very first things it asks for is the seller's Social Security number. A lot of sellers don't want to put their Social Security numbers on a form that a bunch of other people in some office are going to see. Okay. So what I usually tell people is the purpose of this form really is just to the seller to affirm that they are or are not a U.S. citizen, because there's different tax consequences for that, and that's kind of what this form is for. So what I usually tell people to say to sellers is that you don't have to put your Social Security number on here. You can just write on file at title, because title is going to have your seller's Social Security numbers. They're going to have them because they have to get the payout on the loan information or anything else like that. So they're going to be providing that information to escrow, and escrow has their own form that they use for that kind of stuff. But this is supposed to go to the buyer side, and if the sellers don't want to put their social security numbers on the top, then that's totally fine. I'd say go with that. You can just write on file a title, fill it out. The most important thing is to check a box in Part 4, usually the first box at the top, because that box says I am not a non-resident, or I am not a non-resident alien. So basically what they're saying is I am a U.S. citizen, I have a social security number, that kind of thing. Either you're a naturalized citizen or a U.S.-born citizen. The second box is for corporations. That doesn't usually apply to any individuals. If you have two sellers, like a husband and wife, they'll both need to fill one of these out separately. Yeah, any seller that's listed on the title is going to need to fill one of these out. In Part 5 is California law. They should check a box here too, whichever one that applies. Usually the first one, they're selling their primary residence. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's box 2 or box 3 if they're selling someone else's property that they inherited. But the seller should fill those out for themselves. But definitely make sure they check the first box in 4 if that applies. If it doesn't apply, then there's going to be a different tax situation. If it turns out they're a foreign citizen who owns property in the U.S., there's just a different tax situation for that. So, and that I think if your buyers have specific questions about that, they should probably talk to the title person because they can probably explain it better. Sometimes the other side doesn't provide this form to you. If it's your buyers and the listing agent doesn't supply this FIRPTA, the escrow company usually has their own form that they use called a QS. Yeah, that's their qualified substitute. Escrow is saying that they received that information about the sellers, and they're going to verify that, yes, the sellers are U.S. citizens, and they have their own form for that. So you'd see that in escrow. But if you can get this, you should have your sellers fill it out if it's your listing. Like I said, you don't have to put your socials on there, but at least have them fill it out so you can put it on file and say that they did what they're supposed to do. So after that one, we already went over the AVID. The next one in line is the carbon monoxide detector notice. This isn't really a disclosure necessarily because it's really just saying that they're just agreeing that the law says carbon monoxide detectors have to be installed in dwelling units now. So the sellers aren't saying that they actually did it. That's a different form. Yeah. They're just agreeing that they all understand that. And this is kind of redundant too because again, this information's in the SBSA as well. So it's just for peace of mind, I guess. The one below that is the market conditions advisory. Again, that's just about market conditions, and it's really informational stuff for the buyers and sellers, but they both have to sign it, so it's considered a seller disclosure because it comes from the seller side. And then right below that is lead-based paint. That's only for houses built before 1978. So that's increasingly becoming, not needed. But we do have plenty of old houses around here, yeah, that go back to 1938 and stuff like that. So the lead-based paint disclosure is required for that. This is one of the few disclosures you'll get signed from a seller, like an REO seller or a trust seller, because they're still required to supply this form if they don't really know if there's lead paint or not. And there is a spot for the sellers and the buyers and both agents to sign this form as well. So just make sure you get everyone's signature on that. And then below that is the big 12-page SBSA. And that's not really a disclosure necessarily. The sellers aren't saying anything about their specific property in this form. Everyone's just initialing it and signing it saying that they've received it. It's 12 pages. It goes on and on and on about properties and potential situations with buying a property. A lot of the things that are already addressed in other places in the contract and the other forms show up in this form as well. I mean, I don't usually spend too much time reading it to be honest because it just goes on and on about a bunch of stuff. So if anyone has any specific questions about that, we can talk about it, but it's really just informational for the buyers and sellers, mostly for the buyers because it talks about different inspections they can get and possible situations that they might run into. The one below that is the REO advisory. You want to use that in a situation where your buyers or your sellers rather is a bank or usually this is for a bank because it's being sold after foreclosure. But you can also use this if you were sellers were a trust, because again, the trust is there's actually a trust advisory form that comes with if your buyers are buying a property that's being sold by a trust. There's actually a trust advisory that also explains the fact that the seller is exempt from providing some disclosures. So it works very similarly. I don't have a copy of that in here, but that is available in zip forms. And this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as forms that are available in zip forms. There's literally hundreds, and most of them we don't use. But if you're ever looking for something and for a situation and you don't know what form to use, you can probably find it in zip forms. And then right below the REO advisory is the water heater smoke detector. We don't require this form by itself anymore because these questions are answered on the TDS. So we don't require this form to be in your file, but in a situation where it's an REO or a trust where the TDS is not provided, then they would need to sign this because they're not exempt from the compliance for water heater strapping and smoke detectors.
Do you personally review all these that come through the Yuba City office?
I do.
That's your job?
Yeah, that's part of my job. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the one below that is the SSD, the Supplementary Statutory Disclosure. This is similar to the SPQ, it's just not as involved or detailed. You usually don't get this one unless it's an REO situation, like again, where the bank is not answering any questions. They'll provide this form because it's the shortest, but they just usually don't answer any of these questions on this form either. So you'll still see this one occasionally because in that situation, but it doesn't come up very often. The same with the water heater smoke. A lot of people still ask for this form, even though it's been redundant for years. Some agents still ask for it. I don't ask sellers. I don't include this in a disclosure package for sellers to fill out, and I don't include this one either, because these questions are answered somewhere else, and so are these. So you won't see these very often, but sometimes, like I said, agencies still ask for the water heater smoke. And that's pretty much it as far as the big disclosures. I didn't include the earthquake fitness disclosure because there's not really a form for that. Well, there is, but it's part of the earthquake booklet.
Yeah,
it's not a CAR form.
Right. Now we've been through the CAR forms available on zip form.
Right.
One area I always get confused checking off these boxes is the natural hazard disclosure form versus the earthquake safety whatever. And
yeah.
I'm always...
on our checklist, we actually have a designation for the combined hazards booklet, which is it's a CAR publication. It's about 90 pages long and includes the earthquake booklet, lead-based paint, and a bunch of other stuff. Like I said, it's like 90 pages.
If you email that to somebody, is that good enough?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Well, the point I want to make about that is that the natural hazard disclosure includes all that stuff too.
Okay.
When you get an NHD report, they send you the NHD report and